Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something really quite remarkable, and it actually comes from sources you, our listener, brought to our attention a military operation that, well, despite its huge strategic weight, somehow stayed mostly out of the headlines.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Imagine this pressure cooker, border tensions just ratcheting up, diplomatic talks basically collapsing, and you've got this shadow of full-scale conflict looming. How do you possibly act decisively without, blowing the whole thing up?
That really is the core puzzle, isn't it? And that's what we're diving into today. We're talking about Operation Sindoor. It's a strategic move between India and Pakistan.
Sindoor. The name itself feels significant.
It is. It's steeped in symbolism. Sindoor often hints at red, perhaps sacrifice, maybe sacred defense. But beyond the name, the real questions are, what exactly was Operation Sindoor? Why this specific kind of unique response? And maybe most importantly, what ripples are still being felt today?
Okay, so let's unpack that. How did India thread that needle? The sources you sent point back to 2023. Tensions along the line of control, the Law Sea, were apparently sky high.
Extremely high.
And those diplomatic channels, they were just breaking down under the pressure of constant cross-border skirmishes. It sounds like a real powder keg situation. Any misstep could lead straight to war.
Exactly. And it's in that environment that Operation Sindoor seems to have, well, emerged. The sources describe it as a very calculated Indian counterintelligence and military move.
Calculated how?
Its main goal was apparently very specific. Neutralize key militant strongholds in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, Poke, but, and this is the crucial part, without triggering a full-blown war. Precision over escalation, you see.
And that's where it gets really interesting, because unlike operations we've heard more about, like Balakot or Uri, this one, Operation Sindoor, it wasn't officially declared.
Not at all.
It was meant to be silent, strategic, and very surgical. It really feels like a different playbook entirely. So how did they manage something so clandestine but apparently effective?
Well, it points to a different philosophy, maybe. Reports suggest it was a tight collaboration. You had the Indian Army's Special Frontier Force,
Yeah.
the SFF, working hand in glove with intelligence agencies like RNAW.
Okay, the SFF and RNAW makes sense.
And the whole thing was planned meticulously,
Yeah.
executed in 3 distinct phases. Reconnaissance first, then disruption, and finally denial. Each step logically following the other. Almost like clockwork, but, secret clockwork.
Let's break those phases down. Reconnaissance. What did that involve?
So, phase 1, reconnaissance.
Yeah.
It wasn't just your standard intel gathering, though it certainly had that. Drones, local networks, human assets on the ground, sure.
Standard spycraft, yeah.
But what seems to make Sindoor stand out, according to these sources, was this deep reliance on AI-driven pattern recognition and terrain simulation.
AI. How so?
Well, imagine the system not just spotting troop movements, but pulling together seemingly unrelated data points. Maybe unusual energy spikes, specific communication patterns, even like subtle shifts in local market activity. All to predict militant movements and pinpoint strongholds with, well, supposedly unprecedented accuracy. It sounds less like an evolution and more like a real leap in how they gathered intelligence.
Okay, so that AI-driven picture gives them the where and when. That sets the stage for phase 2, disruption. How did the actual kinetic part unfold?
Right, phase 2. This involved very targeted raids. We're talking Indian para-SF troops, their elite special forces, right?
Yeah.
Known for going deep.
Para-SF. Got it.
They apparently crossed into what's described as shallow enemy territory,
Yeah.
mostly under the cover of darkness. But the key thing here, the intent wasn't war. It wasn't about capturing ground or big battles.
What was it then?
Pure tactical domination. Just neutralizing those specific threats identified in phase 1, surgical.
Okay, so recon disruption. Then phase 3, denial. You mentioned that brought in a cyber element.
A significant cyber component, yeah. It seems once the physical operations were done, or maybe even concurrently, India launched these sophisticated cyber strikes,
Aimed at what?
specifically targeting militant communication networks. The idea was to dismantle them. Reports suggest it was effective enough to basically paralyze enemy logistics and command for days.
Paralyzing logistics.
Yeah, think about it. No secure maps, no comms, no orders getting through. It's like a modern siege, but digital, crippling their ability to react or regroup.
And one of the most striking outcomes, mentioned in defense circles at least, was 0 Indian casualties.
Which, if true, considering the risks...
Is a massive testament to that planning and precision you talked about. Really remarkable.
Now let's shift gears a bit to the diplomatic fallout, or maybe the lack of it in some ways. Because the immediate aftermath was, well, telling. Pakistan's initial reaction,
Denial.
complete denial. Flat out said no such operation occurred.
Hmm.
But then you had satellite images starting to surface, intercepted communications, chatter, things that painted a, let's say, a very different picture.
Right. So how did Pakistan react once the denial wasn't really holding?
It seemed to shift pretty quickly from denial to damage control, mobilizing troops near the Lost Sea, lodging diplomatic protests, reaching out to allies like China and flagging it at the UN, a very public effort to manage the narrative.
Which is a stark contrast to India's approach, wasn't it?
Absolutely. India just maintained strategic ambiguity, complete silence officially. No government statement ever acknowledged Operation Sindoor happened.
Never.
Never officially. Yet behind closed doors, you hear whispers from military insiders calling it a defining moment in modern Indian warfare, even without any public fanfare, which makes you wonder why the silence after success.
That is the question. And what about the rest of the world? How did the international community react to this quiet operation?
It's interesting. Reports suggest Western powers sort of quietly applauded India's precision, maybe the restraint shown by not escalating it publicly.
And China, given their relationship with Pakistan.
China, very interestingly, remained silent. Just nothing. Perhaps some analysts speculate they understood the deterrent message. The operation spoke for itself, no announcement needed.
So this quietness extends to the public reception too, right? That's another really unique aspect of Sindoor.
It really is. Unlike those earlier strikes, Balakot, Uri, they dominated headlines, fueled debates for weeks. Operation Sindoor, it largely remained a whispered story, confined to defense journals, think tanks, security circles. It just didn't break through into the mainstream consciousness.
Why do you think that was? Was that silence intentional?
Many analysts argue yes, absolutely intentional.
Yeah.
Possibly to prevent that very escalation we talked about. Maybe also to avoid that kind of hyper-nationalist media frenzy that can sometimes spin up around these things.
Which can then make de-escalation almost impossible politically.
Exactly. Control the narrative by essentially not creating a public one. Keep it contained.
That's the view from think tanks and analysts. What about on the ground, near the low sea?
Ah, that's a crucial point. Because the sources suggest that in the border villages, places like Rajouri and Poonch, the story was different. Locals there did report things.
Like what?
Unusual troop movements around that time, yes. But also, tellingly, they reported quieter nights in the weeks that followed the supposed time frame of the operation. Fewer skirmishes, less firing.
So for the people actually living there, the impact wasn't abstract at all.
Not at all. For them, it wasn't really about geopolitics or headlines. It was about peace, or at least a temporary respite, a tangible difference in their daily or nightly reality. Imagine living with that constant fear and then quiet nights. That's profound, even if it's unspoken publicly.
It really underscores who these operations are ultimately supposed to benefit, doesn't it, beyond the strategy?
Definitely. And speaking of strategy, while Sindoor might not have had a hashtag, sources suggest it absolutely made waves within military circles. It apparently rewrote tactical doctrines.
How so? What changed?
It wasn't just combining existing tactics. It seems Sindoor really demonstrated how that AI-driven intelligence could be fused directly into ground ops for that level of precision. It shifted how reconnaissance in low-intensity conflict might be conceptualized. It wasn't just an update. It was presented as a potential new model.
And for me, the broader takeaway seems clear. It kind of proved that silent strength can sometimes speak much louder than a big televised announcement. The point was made decisively, but without the drama.
Which raises big questions for the future, doesn't it? How nations project power. I mean, the real impact here might be the boost in morale it reportedly gave the forces involved, and how it arguably redefined India's hybrid warfare toolkit.
Hybrid warfare, blending tech, terrain, timing.
Exactly. Blending that advanced AI tech, a deep understanding of the physical terrain, and very precise timing. Integrating it all into a seamless operational doctrine.
So looking ahead, what's the legacy today?
Well, the sources claim Sindoor is now studied in elite defense colleges, not as some whispered legend, but as a concrete model for certain types of future operations. A case study in achieving complex goals with precision and, crucially, that strategic ambiguity.
So to wrap up, Operation Sindoor, a covert chapter shrouded in silence but filled with strategic innovation.
And a testament, perhaps, to how military thinking is evolving in the 21st century, integrating technology and strategy in new, quieter ways.
We hope this deep dive got you thinking about how strategy and silence can be partners, and how modern conflict might be changing, often behind the scenes. And maybe as you reflect on this, ask yourself, What does this shift towards silence